Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little peculiar, a little poetic, and more than a little Icelandic. You've likely heard about medieval punishments before, stocks, gallows, maybe a cold dungeon or two, but Iceland did things differently. Here, out on the edge of the world, beneath wide skies and sweeping glacial winds, justice took on a stranger shape, a more imaginative one. Punishment became performance, morality took the stage, and consequences had textual and icy, or just faintly scented with shame. In this sleepy corner of Norse history, you won't find grand wars or mighty kings. Instead, you'll meet spinsters with secrets, shepherds accused of flirtation, duels fought with bones, and a man who stood naked on a frozen slope to prove his innocence. Picture it, a natural amphitheater of basalt ridges and wine-carved valleys. No gilded thrones, no heavy tapestries. Someone's child kissed the wrong someone's daughter, and all of this is up for public review. Justice here is not locked away behind high walls. It's a performance, out in the open. People gather, gossip, snack on dried fish, and weigh in on the shame or virtue of their neighbors. Just a scattering of tents, smoke curling from cooking fires, and the smell of wool and seaweed. You'd be surprised how much humiliation can be wrung from a well-timed haircut or a clever insult. You lean in as someone mutters about a dispute involving a red skirt already. The stage is being set for one of those more emotional judgments. In this strange little society, there is no king. Here, the law speaker stands to issue verdicts, his voice catching in the wind. Across the fire, a farmer tells you about a saga from his valley, the tale of a man who had to sing his confessions in rhyme for 7 days straight, lest he forget the rhythm of regret. You're not sure if he is joking, but the glint in his eye suggests even the strangest punishments might be half true. But for now, just listen. The moss hums beneath you. Someone nearby is singing an old lullaby in a language shaped like wind through fjords. The way people carry their shame here, it's performative, yes, but also poetic. A woman found guilty of gossip isn't whipped. In the distance, the law speaker's voice softens, his final words for the day swallowed by breeze and sleep. She's made to wear a dress sewn backward for a week, her hair unbraided, barefoot in the cold grass. And there's something oddly beautiful in that. Punishment is choreography, a public dance of remorse. She's pointing at a man whose ears are dyed green. A punishment for lying, supposedly. He claimed he could speak to ravens, someone whispers. Tried to seduce a widow with bird omens. There's a rhythm to it, almost musical. The way he chants the penalties, pauses for murmurs, lets each name hang in the mist like the curl of smoke. You find yourself wondering, is this justice? Or is this theater? Historians still argue about it. Some say the Icelandic legal system was bizarrely progressive, others that it was deeply petty and fueled more by pride than principle. No dungeons. Instead, the law lives in people's memories, carried by something called the law speaker, a man who must recite the rules aloud every year, lest they be forgotten. Strange stories from the Icelandic sagas, where even laughter could be a crime and exile might lead to erotic longing under midnight sun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You're standing in a vast field of moss-draped lava, where low grass hides secrets older than memory. The air is bracing, full of dew and distant sea spray. Before you, a broad plain stretches out, ringed with stony cliffs. You're not alone. Hundreds of people are stirring all around you, wrapping cloaks tighter, brushing sleep from their beards and brows. You are in Ingvellir, the assembly plains, where law and legend entwine. And tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just woken up in medieval Iceland, somewhere around the year 980. You are not in a town, not quite. It's early summer, which means the great Icelandic parliament is convening. You sit on a damp stone bench, watching as disputes unfold around you. Someone stole a goat. Someone insulted a cousin. One man shouts. Another weeps. A woman, accused of selling faulty dye, holds her breath as her woolen threads are inspected like sacred relics. But what catches your attention most is the logberg, the rock, rising like a gray fin from the earth. The punishments themselves rarely involve blood. Iceland didn't have jails. Instead, punishment took form in exile, fines, public shame, or strange ritual. A girl next to you giggles, hiding her face. You make a note, avoid dipots and ravens. Beyond the laughter and legal drama, you notice something quieter. At dusk, people begin to settle. You tuck into a shared bowl of skyr and barley. The stars begin to fade into lavender fog. You lie back on a lichen-covered slope, the volcanic earth warm beneath your spine. Tonight, you'll dream of wool and whispered judgments. And tomorrow, you'll learn about shame rings, those cold metal circles mounted on standing stones. Let it drift over you. Let it carry you deeper. Let it begin. Morning in Hainviller begins not with the sun, but with silver light and the breath of sheep. You stir beneath your woolen blanket, blinking against the sky that never truly darkens this time of year. Around you, tents rustle softly. Cooking fires crackle. A child giggles, chasing after a raven, though hopefully not the same raven from yesterday's scandal. As you rise, your eyes are drawn to something curious nestled beside a crooked hillstone. A tall, narrow slab of rock stands alone, weathered and hollowed at the center. Set into it is a shame ring, a loop of iron, thick and cold-looking, bolted into place at shoulder height. You recognize it now, faintly recalled from the farmer's stories the night before. This is no ordinary decoration. This is a punishment device, built not to hurt the body, but to unravel the soul. The ring is just wide enough for a wrist, or sometimes a neck. Offenders, those found guilty of slander, dishonesty, or moral missteps, were sometimes made to stand here for hours, or even days, fastened in plain view. Not whipped, not shackled indoors, just made still, and watched. You walk closer, the grass brushing your ankles. The metal is rusty, but solid. Wind whistles faintly through the opening. There is something spectral about it, not violent, not cruel, but insistent. The punishment isn't in the pain, it's in the gazes. People pass, people look, people murmur. That is the sting. You wonder how many stood here, cheeks flushed, eyes averted, enduring the weight of others' attention. One old saga describes a woman named Eldfrir, who was sentenced to the shame ring for braiding lies into her neighbor's name. A poetic turn of phrase. For what may have been nothing more than court gossip, she stood here 3 mornings in a row. They say, dressed in a rough cloak turned inside out. Her hair was loose, a symbol of impropriety, and her shoes removed, so she would feel the cool bite of the morning stones. Was she humiliated or defiant? That part is lost to Tom, but the story lingers, passed down like a warning sewn into the seams of memory. A group of young men walk by now, glancing sideways at the ring. One of them gestures, mimicking an exaggerated bow, and his friends snicker. It's become a joke to them, a relic, but something in the air tells you the ring remembers more than they do. The shame ring was sometimes part of a larger punishment stone, known as a nilstand or nigstein, a kind of insult monument. These stones weren't carved with runes or sacred signs, but with symbolic ridicule. Some were topped with carved heads, crude, exaggerated faces meant to resemble the punished. Others had tokens nailed into them, scraps of fabric, broken tools, even bones, offerings, in a way, or curses. You wonder, was this spectacle meant to reform or to amuse? Scholars disagree. Some argue that Icelanders, valuing reputation above all else, crafted punishments meant to strike at honor, not health. Others claim these rituals were little more than social theater, a way for communities to bond through collective shaming. Both could be true. After all, what is more human than watching someone else be punished and feeling safer for it? Nearby, a woman adjusts her shawl and begins whispering to her neighbor. Her eyes flick toward the ring. You catch only a few words, but the tone is familiar, speculative, sing-songy, slightly pleased. It is not hard to imagine how a simple punishment could become a whole week of conversational spice. The man being whispered about is seated not far away, staring at his hands. He's not in the ring, but the shame has already begun. The verdict was yesterday accused of selling salted meat that turned sour. No one knows if it was true, but the buyer was someone important, and that makes all the difference. There is no sign on him, no brand, just distance. People edge away slightly. Laughter fades when he walks past. He doesn't meet your eyes. It's almost more ghostly than if he had been locked in irons. You pause to think about how silence can punish more deeply than noise. It's a theme that runs through many Icelandic sagas. Emotional exile, social drifting. Sometimes the accused weren't sent away physically, but made invisible by agreement. No one spoke to them. No one invited them to feasts. No one mentioned their names. Some faded out entirely. Others snapped, returning with vengeance or in verse. Because here, words are not merely decoration. They are weapons. Poetic attacks, called nigh, were sometimes more dangerous than blades. To be insulted in a verse was to be wounded in the soul. If the verse took root, was memorized, passed on, then the wound never closed. In fact, if you insulted someone too cleverly, you might end up in the shame ring yourself. Icelandic law considered nigh dangerous magic. Words could summon shame the way spells summon storms. You reach out now, touching the iron ring. It's colder than expected, almost humming. Maybe with wind, maybe memory. And still, it wasn't always cruel. Some stood here and smiled. One woman, accused of bathing alone where men might see her, implying, of course, that she intended to be seen, was made to stand in the shame ring wearing only a sheep's wool mantle, unspun and still damp. Supposedly, she flirted with every passerby, wink, saying. People started stopping by just to hear her jokes. Afterward, she married a merchant from the eastern coast. The punishment became a courtship. Love, after all, thrives in strange soils. You step away from the stone now. Somewhere in the distance, someone is shouting. A boy has tried to wrestle a ram wearing ceremonial ribbons, probably part of some odd little ritual or someone's private punishment. You leave them to it. Your fingers still feel the chill of the shame ring, and your thoughts linger on the many who passed through it. Were they broken or baptized into some new version of themselves? Perhaps both. As you return to your tent for a midday nap, the breeze rises, lifting the grass in soft waves. You think about standing stones, about rings that bind without rope, and about the curious ways humans decide what deserves a wound and what deserves only a look. You awaken to a strange sound, soft, repetitive, rhythmic. At first, you think it might be wind brushing reeds or the creak of nearby leather straps. But as you blink the sleep from your eyes and sit up inside your sagging tent, you realize it's the sound of wool being spun. Not by a machine, not by hand. Fast, practiced fingers twisting fiber into thread, again and again. There's something mesmerizing about it. Outside, the afternoon has grown golden and crisp. You follow the sound to a quiet corner of the assembly grounds where 3 women sit in a circle, each with a spindle, each working silently. They don't speak. They don't need to. Their hands do the talking, or to trade for herbs from the coast. The saga being muttered this summer is that she stole a single bolt of homespun wool from her neighbor. Instead, she was ordered to spin wool for 12 days without pause, under supervision. Without gloves, without comfort. Love, pride, hunger, they all blur together. And so, punishments become layered, too. A way to reweave a person back into the moral fabric. Others say it was simply public suffering dressed in virtue. A way to wrap humiliation in the guise of morality. There's no record of how Ggga herself felt. Was forced to weave a new one in full view of the community. As she wove, she added hidden symbols in the design. Little knots and zigzags meant to mimic runes. You notice, just beyond the spinning circle, a man holding a basket. A quiet figure. He glances toward the girl, then quickly looks away. And you, sitting quietly nearby, feel as though you're watching something older than law unfold. something deeply human. Rumor has it, he was once punished the same way, forced to dive for weeks after a false trade claim. The sun never quite sets in this part of the world, just circles lazily overhead like a sleepy guardian. The girl does not look up, she only spins. But his colors ran, his threads broke, his penance failed. Now, no one trusts his work or his name. By the time she finished, the blanket was more legend than cloth. A merchant bought it, then married her. The blanket, supposedly, still exists somewhere in a museum vault, though the runes have faded with time. Only the memory of her chapped fingers and downcast eyes. Was this meant to shame her, or educate her, or perhaps keep her hands too busy to pursue love? As the hours pass, people begin to drift closer, not to mock, but to murmur, to admire. Her spinning is fast, elegant. Even the most skeptical begin nodding. A seductress might become a poet, a gossiper, an informer. Punishments didn't always crush, they sometimes revealed. A merchant offers to buy a bundle of her thread. Another suggests she might become a weaver for the eastern quarter. Once her penance ends, every hour, a woman from the surrounding valleys would come to inspect her progress. If she slowed, she was scolded. If she cried, she was reminded that tears do not twist fiber. Enough to make one tunic, perhaps two, if the cut was clever. But in Iceland, where cloth served as both currency and comfort, this wasn't just stealing fabric, it was robbing warmth, some said. A crime against the hearth. And beside them, not far off, is a girl barely more than 16, with tangled blonde hair and a wide, nervous stare. Her fingers are raw, her knees are muddy, and at her feet lies an enormous pile of unspun wool. You found the punishment for theft. The girl's name, whispered among the onlookers, is GGGA. Her punishment, as determined by the local chieftain and some well-reasoned gossip, was not flogging or exile. You sit on a nearby stone and watch. Her fingers move like frantic birds. The wool catches, slips, twists, reforms. The older women speak in soft tones, mostly among themselves. They speak of theft. Yes, but also desire. GGGA is unmarried, pretty, and a washed out, hay-dusted way. And the man from whom she stole, widowed, wealthy, not unhandsome. Maybe she took it to sew a courting dress, one woman whispers behind her hand. Or maybe, says another, she just wanted to feel lovely for once. There's no way to know. The girl won't speak. But in the Icelandic sagas, motives are never simple. Historians still debate the point. Some scholars argue that this sort of penance, domestic labor as punishment, was a form of social reintegration, not cruel, but corrective still. You can't help but notice something odd. Is it possible that punishment has become talent? Such is the strange nature of Icelandic justice. The line between correction and cultivation was thin. A thief might become a craftsman. One tale, found in the Vatnsdula saga, tells of a woman named Hrafnhildr who, accused of selling flawed blankets to travelers, you wonder if GGGA will leave today with the same fate. Not in disgrace, but in transformation. Still, not all find redemption. Not all sagas end with a wedding. Still, for now, the day winds on, the girl spins. The wool shortens, her fingers shine faintly with blood and lanolin. You rise to leave as a cool wind brushes the grass, and in that movement, she rewrites her story. The wind picks up in gentle waves as you move toward a quieter edge of the Alving grounds. In this low valley where the grass bends in slow motion and the shadows of sheep stretch long across the slope, another kind of tale is being whispered. It begins not with crime, but with color, a bold swath of red wool swaying from a closed line, catching the eyes of too many villagers. They call it the case of the red skirt. You're drawn to the small crowd that's formed outside a half-leaning turf tent, not a court, not officially just neighbors and cousins. And that one always opinionated shepherd's wife. Their voices are soft, but laced with judgment. You peer past the gathering and see her Margaret, they say, young, unmarried, and with too much confidence in her stride. Her dress today is plain brown, but her reputation wears red. The skirt in question was crimson dyed with rare madder root, likely imported, and impossibly rich. Margaret wore it to last week's gathering, letting it swing just above her ankles. She did not blush. She did not look down. She walked with purpose, and that, apparently, was a problem. Women in medieval Iceland walked carefully, especially unmarried ones. Color was a language. Red spoke of wealth, boldness, perhaps even availability. And here was so many men watching. It had said far too much. Now she's accused not of theft nor sorcery, but of moral arrogance, a loosely defined social offense where beauty, if worn too proudly, becomes a kind of seduction. You sit beside a group of older women who murmur into their cloaks. One of them shakes her head. That girl let a married man refill her drinking horn twice. Another replies, and didn't she wear perfume last season? Imported, I heard. But a third woman, quieter, simply says, she reminds me of me. Once. Historians still argue about cases like Margaret's. Was this real justice, or just a way to police women's agency in a community where choices were scarce? Some say these were simply rural fashion disputes, village-scale drama inflated by long winters and short tempers. Others believe they reveal something more complex, the fear of female autonomy in a place where rules about love, beauty, and power were written in wool, not parchment. The penalty isn't violent, but it's pointed. Margaret must now wear only dull colors for a month. No reds, no blues, not even green. She's been instructed to appear modest, which means her hair is to be braided into 2 tight ropes, her cloak pinned with the plainest brooch available, and her skirts tied low, barely brushing her boots each day. She must walk through the gathering fields at the same time the merchants arrive, and bow slightly, not as apology, but as an act of deliberate visibility. The idea, of course, is humbling, but watching her now, arms folded and gaze level, you suspect the punishment might be backfiring. Some men steal glances, some women walk behind her, adjusting their own shawls, their eyes flicking downward as if checking themselves. No one says it, but everyone knows. The red skirt lives on in memory. In the sagas, women like Margaret often blur the lines between troublemaker and icon. There's a Slaug who wore blue wool to a winter funeral and was accused of smiling too much in the cold. Or Brynhildr, who painted her fingernails with crushed berries and claimed it helped her weave faster until she was banned from berry picking altogether. These stories might sound quaint, even funny, but beneath the surface, they reveal a deep discomfort with female visibility. Even the punishment of clothing is layered. To wear drab tones is not merely about hiding, it's about control. And yet, in an odd way, it backfires. Everyone notices the girl who used to wear red. Someone leans over and says, "Do you know the story of the red hemline test?" You shake your head. It's an old tradition, they explain, barely remembered now. In some valleys, a girl who was suspected of seduction was made to dip her skirt hem in ash water, then wear it until it dried. If the ash clung, she was deemed impure. If it brushed off, she was innocent. You blink at that. What exactly does ash know of purity? Still, these rituals persisted, not because they worked, but because they offered spectacle, a show of justice, a soft humiliation in service of community reassurance. Margaret's punishment includes one more detail. She's not to speak unless addressed, and she must answer in verses, not full poems, just short rhyming phrases. The idea is that rhythm trains humility. But again, you sense the risk. A woman made to speak in rhyme becomes a performer, and performers become legends. This morning, someone overheard her say, "In perfect meter, let winter pass in shadows plain. The red will rise in spring again," not exactly an apology. The crowd begins to drift away. Margaret remains still, arms loose at her side, face turned slightly to the sky. She's not embarrassed, not defiant either, just watching. And you realize, quietly, that she's already won. The skirt itself has vanished, but its ghost lingers in every whispered comment and lowered gaze. You walk back toward the central path, the wind tugging at your cloak. You pass a merchant arranging wool by color brown, gray, blue, and, at the very bottom, a single bolt of deep red. He sees you eyeing it and gives the smallest smile. Popular this year, he says softly. Sold faster than salt. You don't answer. Just keep walking. You think of Margaret, of verses, of ash water and wool, and somewhere in your mind, the hem of a red skirt swings just out of reach. A low wall of stacked stone marks the edge of the assembly fields. Beyond it, the land rises in shaggy green ridges and dips into soft hollows where sheep graze. Largely unbothered by the human rituals taking place nearby, you wander toward one of these hollows now, where a group of boys are clustered around a small fence pointing, snickering, and trading daring whispers. But in medieval Iceland, fence jumping was more than a countryside prank. It referred to the act of sneaking onto another's land for private rendezvous, usually of the amorous kind. It was, in other words, a euphemism for forbidden love, or, depending on who was watching, an act of trespass with intent to seduce. At the center of their attention stands a young man, probably not much older than the rest of them. But unlike them, he is not free to move. The neighbor had a daughter, unmarried, 17, known for her harp playing and her fondness for honeyed barley cakes. And that, in itself, was enough to summon judgment. Her father was less fond of visitors, particularly the kind who came after moonrise. Fence jumpers must speak in verse for the duration of their penance. It's meant to be humbling, ridiculous, but you suspect it also keeps the punishment from turning to sour. Even flirtation, in Iceland, is governed by form and meter. She even said she'd never spoken to him at all. He gives a slow smile, though she was humming when she said it. He leans against the fence, arms folded tightly, his posture defiant but clearly uncomfortable. He did doubt she was fine, but the rune carving was so elegant that it was later copied into a chieftain's doorway. Was it manipulation or art? Was it about purity or power? This is the third time this season, he murmurs, shaking his head. These boys think fences are merely decorative. His sentence requires him to sit with his feet in cold water for 1 hour each day, to cool his urges. It's part metaphor, part discomfort, part public joke. Someone nearby places a flower on the fence post. No one claims it from where you stand. It's hard to tell what exactly he's done. But soon, someone tells you. Maybe the girl will meet him again. Maybe not. Maybe this will all dissolve into gossip and grain harvests. But for now, this hollow becomes a little theater of desire, restraint, and sheep fencing, where punishment smells faintly of grass and young pride. And like most good Icelandic punishments, the story involves love, trespassing, and livestock. A soft, familiar voice is humming a tune, possibly her, possibly someone else entirely. The melody is slow, uneven, almost like a harp. The phrase for it is almost poetic, fence jumping. It sounds innocent, even romantic. The shame seems to be softening into something else, a kind of rustic romance play, staged by obligation. The punishments vary, but the theme remains, passion disguised as misconduct. The young man, his name is said to be Eiríkur, was caught slipping over a neighbor. As fenced 3 nights ago, there were no formal accusations of improper touch, nothing overt. But the fence had been climbed. Now Eiríkur is sentenced to shameful station, a punishment somewhere between isolation and public farce. For 3 days, he must sit or stand near the fence he crossed, within sight of his neighbors, and answer any question asked of him. Iceland prized poetry. Even insults had rhythm. Punishment through rhyme seems absurd unless you believe it was also meant to refine. No lies allowed. His hands are bound loosely, not tightly enough to cause pain, but enough to restrict gesture. A subtle theatrical cue. He's not dangerous, just disobedient. At intervals, people pass. Some ask teasing questions. Did you trip climbing over? Was her hair really as long as they say? Did you mean to visit the sheep pen instead? Eiríkur answers each with a carefully worded response, always rhymed. This, too, is part of the sentence. One older man leans against the stones beside you. You ask what would happen if the girl's father had pressed for a harsher punishment. The man shrugs. He could have, but she denied any contact. You glance back at Eiríkur. He's reciting a line about the moonlight making the moss look like silk. He's grinning now. The boys laugh. In the sagas, stories like this crop up often. Forbidden lovers, overheard music, midnight conversations beneath eaves or over low fences. One curious tale, often debated among scholars, speaks of a woman named Disla who carved love runes into the inside of her sheep's gate so that her suitor would feel compelled to visit. Historians still argue over whether these love misconduct cases were genuinely moral in concern, or just ways for fathers to control daughters and for rivals to shame would-be son-in-law. Another debate concerns whether the verses required of the punished were intended to shame them or train them. Back near the fence, Eiríkur is given a wooden stool. You're not sure what will happen next. You head back toward the assembly hall, the distant drone of law recitations drifting on the wind. And you think, once again, how Iceland's strangest punishments always seem to start with something like love. The next morning brings a strange, yawning quiet to Hingvellir. Even the sheep seem contemplative. Bleeding only occasionally as thin wisps of mist slip down from the surrounding ridges. The air smells of wet moss, wood smoke, and something oddly sweet, perhaps honey, perhaps sorrow. You wander toward the central clearing, where the Althing's legal matters continue in earnest. Today, however, you're drawn to a different kind of judgment, not one spoken aloud by the law speaker, but one performed in the ritual of exile, Iceland's most severe, and yet strangely poetic. Punishment, they call it lesser outlawry, or fjörbagsskar, a mouthful, to be sure. But it meant something very specific, 3 years of banishment, usually from the entire island, but not necessarily for life. It was Iceland's version of a second chance not given. You first see the man at the center of the matter near the eastern slope, surrounded by family. His name is Styrbjörn. His beard is ash blonde, his face pocked with wine-burn, and his shoulders, despite the circumstances, remain squared. His crime was manslaughter during a turf boundary dispute, a sin not entirely uncommon in a land where property lines were measured by sheep tracks and memory. He claimed it was unintentional. The other man fell backward during a scuffle, but death, regardless of motive, demanded reparation. The family of the dead had not demanded his blood. They'd asked for his absence. You now bear witness to the punishment that doesn't look like punishment. There are no chains, no lashes. Instead, Styrbjörn's belongings are being divided into thirds. One part to his kin, one to the victim's family, and one he is allowed to carry with him if he can carry it by hand. What he chooses to bring says much: a belt knife, a sealing ring, a wrap for a cloak, and, curiously, a small carved comb. This last item raises eyebrows. That's his wife's. Someone mutters. She gave it to him when he returned from a raid. A subtle rebellion, perhaps a declaration that he won't forget who he is, no matter where he's sent. But there's more. Before he departs, he must walk the length of the gathering grounds with a long goose feather tucked into his belt. It's white, pure, and somewhat ridiculous. Traditionally, this feather marks him as harmless by law, but shamed by presence. No one is allowed to hurt him as he leaves, but few will look him in the eye. Some children snicker. A woman turns away, clasping her shawl. Only one elder, a white-bearded man with a crooked staff, nods as he passes. It's a strange thing to watch. A man shunned not with violence, but with absence. People do not scold him. They simply vanish from his world, one glance at a time. And yet, there is a peculiar romance in this kind of punishment in Iceland. Exile is not exile in the way we think of it now. It's an invitation into solitude, a kind of forced pilgrimage. The exiled man must leave the island, or at least travel far enough from his home valley that his presence no longer causes tension. Some sailed to Greenland, some wandered through Norway, others, quietly, returned to remote Icelandic peninsulas, and waited the years out like ghosts. Scholars still debate whether these exiles were strictly enforced. Many believe it depended on the will of the offended party. If the dead man's kin were powerful, the exile might be enforced with threats and informants. But if time softened grief or bribes softened resolve, the punished could return sooner than expected. Some even flourished in exile. A man might spend 3 years trading abroad, returning wealthier than he left. Others used exile as a kind of rebirth. There's one tale in the Uljuvetninga saga of a man who returned with new gods. Tattooed on his chest, spirits from the east, they claim, who whispered to him across dark seas. And yet, for others, exile was a kind of social death. Memory faded, names fell out of use. When they returned, their seats were taken, their fences crumbled, their lovers had moved on. Styrbjörn reaches the edge of the gathering field. His wife does not follow him. She stands a short way behind, holding their daughter's hand. She's not crying, just watching. The wind shifts, and you catch a last fragment of their quiet farewell. 3 winters, she murmurs. 3 winters, he replies. Then he turns and walks into the mist. The feather in his belt shivers once, then settles. You remain still for a moment, letting the hush settle into your bones. There is something haunting about it. Punishment without wounds, shame without shouting. Love held in the space between glances. As you turn to leave, an old man beside you chuckles softly. You know, he says, in some valleys, it's said the feather is not just a sign of harmlessness but a reminder that no man is truly free until he's walked through silence. You nod, though you're not quite sure what that means. But it lingers in your mind as you return toward the center, where the fires have begun again, and new verdicts are being prepared. In Iceland, the law does not always punish with violence. Sometimes, it simply asks you to vanish and see who waits for you when you return. The smell reaches you before the sound does, sweet and smoky, thick with fermented fish and something musky, like animal fat left too long in a warm pouch. You follow it through the narrow lanes of tents and cook fires until you find the source. A tall woman with graying braids stirring a pot over a peat hearth, her hands coated in something slick and dark. She's humming not a song exactly, more like a tone, something rhythmic and oddly comforting. But it's not the food that draws the crowd today. It's the punishment. Beside her, bound at the ankles with braided rope and seated cross-legged in a pit smeared with ashes, is a man named a Fager. Or rather, that's what they still call him for now. But his name, as it turns out, is up for review. You're about to witness one of the strangest and most symbolic punishments of medieval Iceland. A ritual of name stripping. A Fager was found. Guilty of deception, he sold a goat disguised as a ewe, claiming she would birth twins come spring. The buyer, a superstitious widow from the western fjords, swore the animal was cursed. When no lambs came, and the goat's beard grew long, she marched to the Althing and demanded justice. It wasn't just fraud, it was dishonor, a public lie. Dressed in homespun cloth, the chieftains didn't sentence a Fager to flogging, nor exile, nor even fine. They sentenced him to something far stranger, symbolic erasure, for 3 days. He must not speak his own name, nor answer to it. Others may refer to him only in metaphors: goat seller, false tongue, or the particularly poetic he who promised twins. He must cook, serve, and wash without complaint. He is not allowed to use utensils. His meals must be eaten from a broken bowl, and only after others have had their share. You sit nearby, intrigued. His face is hard to read, not humiliated exactly, just distant, as if waiting for the ordeal to end so he can return to the man he was. The older woman, his aunt, as whispered, leans over and wipes ash across his forehead in 3 strokes. To mark the memory, she mutters, "You notice." A small wooden tablet nearby, engraved with the shape of a goat and a spiral. It's a joke, of course, but also something more. A sigil of reputation lost. The punishment is largely symbolic, but in Iceland, symbolism cuts deep. A man without a name is a man without standing. And in a society where oral tradition preserves everything from family trees to blood debts, to be forgotten even temporarily is to brush against death. Some scholars argue that name stripping may have had roots in pre-Christian rites, where identity could be suspended or cooled after a spiritual trespass. Others suggest it was a legal loophole since the crime couldn't be punished by force. They punished it through reputation. Still others believe it was meant to provoke reform through embarrassment, a soft, communal exile that didn't require the C. In one old tale, a woman named Vigdis was found guilty of naming her illegitimate child after a chieftain without his permission. Her punishment, for an entire season, no one would say her name aloud. Her food was left on the edge of gatherings. She could speak, but only to the wind, it seemed. The saga doesn't say if she ever fully returned, but it knows that her child grew up to be a fine poet. Back in the present, the fire hisses. A faker stirs a pot of barley and bitter herbs, then carefully ladles it into mismatched bowls. People accept the food, some with thanks, others with stiff silence. One child asks, "Is it true you tried to put a bonnet on a billy goat?" There's laughter. Even a faker smiles. Briefly, it's a strange kind of punishment, one laced with humor, with ritual, and with a deep undercurrent of communal correction. No one hits him. No one spits, but every action reminds him and everyone watching that words matter. That deception, no matter how small, leaves a mark. At the close of the third day, if all conditions are met, the law speaker will allow him to reclaim his name. There will be a quiet ceremony, a bowl of clear water. He'll speak his name into it, and someone, usually a family elder, will answer back. And just like that, the story is over. Or at least, folded neatly away. You stay a little longer, watching. A faker move carefully, steadily, like a man trying to earn back the weight of his own footsteps. He avoids the gaze of young women. He oversalts the barley. He doesn't argue when someone calls him Billy. It is, in a way, dignified. Before you go, you pass the carved goat tablet and run your fingers along the spiral. It's smooth. Someone's taken time to sand it. It's not a mark of cruelty, you realize. It's a reminder, a symbol to laugh at, or never forget. You stand, brush the dust from your cloak, and head toward the steeper paths above the camp. Behind you, the ash-faced man ladles stew, and someone calls out. More for the man with too many promises. The crowd chuckles. The punishment, it seems, is almost over. But the story always stays. You climb the slope beyond the camp where the wind grows bolder, tugging at your cloak like a restless child. From here, Hingviller spreads below like a woven map, tents and fire pits stitched between patches of moss and stone. But further up, tucked into a crease in the land, is a ring of standing stones older than any man alive. Children call it the Whispering Circle, and today, it's the site of a punishment older than law itself. At first, you think it's just a ritual until you hear the hush of onlookers, the way people avoid eye contact, the bundle of dried nettles tied with red string. Then you understand. You're witnessing a sentence of public silence, a punishment reserved for those who've spoken too freely about what should not be spoken of. The girl at the center of the stones is no older than 18. Her name is Haldora. Her cheeks are wine-bitten, her eyes soft, her posture stiff. She has been accused not of theft, nor lust, nor violence, but of naming someone else's shame too loudly. Whispers say she told a tale that was meant to stay folded. A neighbor's affair, a misplaced child, perhaps even a false healing spell sold for too much silver. The details shift with every voice, like mist. What is certain is this: Haldora repeated a truth that someone powerful wanted forgotten. And so, She has been sentenced to a full day of speechlessness within the stones, not just quiet, but purposeful silence. She must answer no questions, respond to no greetings, speak no prayer. Instead, she wears a necklace of nettles and sheep's wool, a traditional warning that her words have become unsafe. Even to herself, nearby, a boy about her age stands holding a carved wooden staff. His role is symbolic. He is the listener, a silent witness to her penance every hour. He taps the ground beside her once. If she replies, even with a whisper, the punishment resets. It seems almost playful, but it's not in this. Culture died in Iceland. The spoken word held immense power. Names, lineages, insults. Blessings all carried force. But so did gossip, especially in a world where reputations were fragile and the smallest rumor could spiral into violence. Taldora's mistake, whether accidental or bold, threatens someone's stability. And so, she is unspoken about until the allotted time has passed. Some scholars believe punishments like this stem from the tension between Iceland's communal closeness and its cultural emphasis on restraint. In villages where everyone knew everyone else's business, the art of knowing when not to speak became essential. The punishment isn't about shame alone, it's about trust. By keeping her in the open, by placing her in the circle rather than banishing her to the forest, the community signals something subtle. You may have betrayed us, but we are giving you the chance to learn from watching. And so she sits occasionally. A breeze tosses her hair across her eyes. She doesn't brush it away. A child tiptoes close and places a flower near her foot. Haldora blinks but does not smile. Her hands rest gently in her lap, knuckles red from cold. You wonder what she thinks of, whether her words were reckless or necessary, whether she regrets them or simply regrets being caught. There's no way to know. That's part of the ritual. The punishment invites reflection, but does not demand confession. The saga writers would love her. Women like Haldora appear in their tales, sharp-eyed, too clever for their station, too vocal for their safety. Sometimes they end in triumph, sometimes in silence, often both. One story, little known outside the eastern fjords, tells of a girl named Hern who spoke openly of her cousin's secret affair with a Christian priest. Her punishment was to carry a bowl of melted snow across a field without spilling a drop. She succeeded, but when asked how she kept her hands steady, she answered, "Because what I said was not a lie." That line became a proverb, etched into doorframes for generations. Still, the punishment has a strange mercy to it. Haldora is not insulted. No one throws stones. Her family brings her a warm cloak, which she wraps tightly without breaking the silence. There's respect here, hidden beneath the coolness, as if they all know the same truth. Anyone could be next. As the sun begins to dip, the listener taps the earth for the final time. Haldora lifts her head slightly, but does not speak. That is the key. The punishment ends not with noise, but with restraint. Later, when you see her by the cook fires, no one shuns her. No one mocks. A friend passes her a bowl of fish stew. She nods thanks. The necklace of nettles is gone, replaced by a simple thread of bone beads. And just like that, she re-enters the story. You return to your tent thinking of how rare that is. In so many cultures, to speak wrong is to be exiled forever. But here, in this land of moss and smoke and measured words, even a silence can be forgiven. And perhaps more importantly, even silence can be remembered. Morning in Hingvellir drapes the land in silver dew caught on grass blades, mist clinging to cloak hems, and the sound of hooves echoing against soft stone. You wake to the muted clang of a blacksmith's hammer somewhere distant, and just beyond the merchant stalls, another punishment is beginning. This one smells like sulfur. You follow the scent to a wide, scorched ring of earth where a man named Dorvaldus crouched near a vat of something bubbling and unkind. His tunic sleeves are rolled up, his brow glistens, and his punishment. It's called the stew of shame. No, not a literal stew, though the bubbling vat might fool you. This is a special sentence reserved for one particular offense, insulting another's cooking. And in Iceland, that could be a graver slight than you'd think. It started, they say, when Dorvalda declared during a spring feast that a widow's meat tasted like sour milk, and that her boiled lamb must have come from an animal that died. Of embarrassment, he laughed. Others laughed. The widow did not. Now he's been ordered to make a communal stew from whatever ingredients the crowd brings him. No matter how strange, mismatched, or difficult, he must then serve it with compliments to every person present, no matter how rude they are in return. Today's ingredients are challenging. Someone brought pickled seal tongue. Another, fermented berries. A third offered a turnip carved to resemble a goat's head, which might be more sculpture than food. Dorvalda has no choice. He must make do. This ritual isn't just a joke. In Icelandic society, hospitality was sacred. Meals weren't just nourishment. They were oaths of peace, trust, even affection. To mock a hostess's cooking was to mock her station, her labor, sometimes even her marriage prospects. In communities where survival hung on shared resources, disrespecting food was nearly a social betrayal. The punishment, then, is twofold: labor and humility. Dorvalda must prepare a dish good enough to be eaten, and his compliments must be sincere or convincingly fake. And everyone knows it's harder to flatter your enemies than to punch them. You sit nearby as he stirs. The smell is somewhere between smoked fish, vinegar, and overcooked root. Not pleasant, but not lethal either. Someone calls out, "Make sure mine doesn't curdle like your pride." Dorvalda nods, ladles some into a wooden bowl, and says sweetly, "Ah, but your presence today curdles nothing, only elevates this humble recipe to something nearly edible." There's a burst of laughter and a ripple of admiration. You notice something shifting. The stew might be revolting, but the performance is impressive. It's not about the food, it's about swallowing one's pride and serving it back warm. The sagas are full of food-based punishments. One woman was ordered to prepare a feast using only ingredients from her own doorstep: moss, pebbles, wild onion, and dried lichen after insulting a chieftain's feast. Another man, who mocked a healer's soup, was forced to eat only bread, soaked in seawater for a month. Icelanders were inventive and never let a joke die quietly. Historians debate whether these food punishments were widespread or simply exaggerated in the stories. Some suggest they may have been seasonal community punishments, a theatrical affair, used during assemblies to resolve petty feuds without escalation. Others believe they were a kind of ritual penance, a shared moment of ridiculousness to rein it, fraying social bonds. Back at the stew pot, Dorvalda is beginning to look weary. His compliments are growing poetic. One woman receives her bowl with a smile after he declares, "This ladle sings in honor of your strength, your kindness, and your ability to make even salted herrings seem like a blessing from the sea." Gods, her husband smirks. "Careful," he mutters. "She'll ask you to cook at our next feast." You notice that the crowd, which started mean-spirited, has grown gentler. There's something irresistible about watching a proud man grovel gracefully, and Dorvalda, to his credit, is playing his role well. Even the widow he insulted earlier accepts her bowl with a nod, though she does take a very slow, very theatrical sip before giving a non-committal grunt. It's unclear whether she forgives him, but she doesn't dump the stew out either. Before the pot runs dry, a child toddles up with a sprig of bog mint and tosses it in. The scent blooms briefly above the rest. Dorvalda smiles, drops to one knee, and says to the child, "Your gift has saved us all. I name you master of the ladle." The crowd roars with laughter. The tension, which had once simmered, now evaporates. Like steam. You sit back, arms crossed, letting the warmth of the moment settle in your chest. This is Icelandic justice at its finest, equal parts punishment, performance, and public bonding. No flogging, no exile, just a bruised ego and a soup. Spoon. As the crowd disperses, someone slips Dorvalda's small bottle of honey. Another presses a clean cloth into his hand. A third claps him on the back and mutters, "Next time, just lie about the mead." He nods, still grinning. But you suspect the lesson has stuck dead in Iceland. Your pride can boil as easily as your broth. And if you mock a woman's kitchen, you might just find yourself cooking for the whole valley. As the sun inches higher and casts long, silvery shadows overhang Villor, the air carries a different tension now, not the smoke of cooking or the quiet of exile, but the sharp, anticipatory hush of judgment drawn with ink and skin. You're heading toward the law tent, though not for a speech or a verdict. Today's punishment is stitched, not shouted out outside the tent. Seated on a low stone bench is a woman with her sleeves rolled up and a bone needle threaded through dark wool. Her face is calm, experienced. This is Rania, the settlement's most skilled scribe, craftswoman of the body, called upon not to wound, but to mark. Inside the tent waits her subject, a man named Catil, convicted not of murder or theft, but of something more unusual, cowardice in the face of blood feud. He had been called to avenge a brother. The entire assembly knew the story. His sibling slain in a brawl over pasture rights. A legal claim was made, then withdrawn, then rekindled. In the end, all expected Catil to act to challenge, to strike, or at least to demand justice. He did nothing, or rather, he settled early, offering silver, an apology before the other family could even formally press the claim. It wasn't illegal, but it was disappointing. And so, at the urging of his own kin, yes, his own, he agreed to accept the mark of the unready, a soft but visible punishment carried not in exile, but on skin. You slip into the tent's edge and watch in silence. Catil sits shirtless, eyes closed, fists pressed against his knees. On his left shoulder blade, Rania is stitching a symbol, not an ugly one. In fact, it's rather beautiful. A delicate spiral knot, crossed once by a short vertical line. It looks almost like a rune, but no one speaks its name aloud. She works with thread blackened by soot and crushed berries. No ink, no metal. The thread will remain for 7 days before it's carefully removed, but the scar will linger, light, faint, but unmistakable. And here's the twist. It is not a symbol of shame. Not exactly. It is a mark of pause, of hesitation, of something unresolved, a signal to the community that this man stepped away from his duty, not in cowardice, strictly, but perhaps in confusion, or weakness, or sorrow. Iceland's punishments don't always pretend to know the full story, but they record what happened. You learn that this marking is voluntary but socially encouraged, a kind of trade, instead of being mocked for years. Catil wears the truth openly, and by doing so, shortens the gossip's lifespan. People whisper less when the thing they're whispering about is already sewn on your back. The sagas hint at this tradition, though always elliptically. A verse in Grettir's saga mentions the red-threaded man who turned from blades, and another tale speaks of a woman who bore the wound of inaction after failing to speak on behalf of her foster child. These aren't wounds of battle, they're wounds of omission. Some scholars argue that these marks were symbolic tattoos, a way of scripting one's social standing directly onto the body. Others believe they were more like temporary scars, intentionally shallow but still richly meaningful. Either way, the practice reveals something essential in a world obsessed with legacy. Even silence leaves a trace. Catil does not wince. His breath is steady. Rania finishes the stitching and presses a warm cloth over the design. No one claps. No one speaks. The room is full of the unique Icelandic respect, sober, unadorned, and sharp-edged as basalt. You leave the tent and find yourself standing under a birch tree, looking back at the flap as it closes. Later, they will burn the thread in a small fire, and the ash will be scattered across the pasture. No one will say Catil was weak. They'll just say he bore the mark, which may be worse, or better, or simply different. A woman nearby is humming a lullaby. Her child sleeps in her lap. A small bandage on his arm where a similar mark was placed, though. His was for stealing butter from a neighbor's pantry, a childish offense, remedied with a few days of public service and a tiny, temporary thread looped on his wrist. Even children, it seems, are not too young to be taught the art of remembrance. You wonder if Kettle's scar will fade, if he'll someday rear in the trust of those who expected more, or if he'll leave this valley, find a new one, and carve a different story into his life. You suspect the Sagas would say both. That's how Iceland remembers things, not in black and white, but in wolf-red gray. You've walked into quieter quarters now, away from the assembly's heart and into the patch of forest just beyond the outer tents. The air is still here, and thick with the scent of pine tar and old herbs. Somewhere nearby, a bird repeats the same to notes like a forgotten verse. Ahead, nestled beneath a natural arch of stone and moss, sits a small structure half shed, half shrine. You see a man standing within it, bare-chested, draped in furs, the faint steam of boiled water curling around his shoulders. Beside him, a woman holds a shallow clay bowl in one hand and a length of birch bark in the other. This is no healer's hut. It is a public cleansing station. And the man, his name is Hrafn, is not sick, but punished. He has been found guilty of violating a guest's privacy during a sacred visit, and now he must undergo a rare form of atonement, ritual bathing for social contamination. The accusation is this: a visiting woman from the north, perhaps a cousin of a local chieftain, had been staying at Hrafn's home under the fragile protection of guest law. But one night, someone saw him at her window. He claimed he was worried she had been ill. She claimed he lingered too long. Whether it was desire or curiosity, the verdict was clear. He had breached the boundary of trust, even if nothing else was proven. In Iceland, hospitality was sacrosanct. To violate the safety of a guest's private chamber was not just impolite, it was an affront to the house gods themselves. And so Hrafn, rather than face a fine or exile, has agreed to undergo this ritual cleansing. Both symbolic and, judging by his face, physically unpleasant. The woman with the birch bark recites a string of phrases in Old Norse. The exact words are hard to catch, but their meaning is clear. You have brought discomfort into comfort, and so you must wear it. She tips the clay bowl, and a thick liquid pours slowly down his chest. It's brown, sticky, and pungent, made from ash sap, bog water, and a tincture of rotted angelica root. This isn't about hygiene. It's about public memory. You learn that the punishment has 3 stages. First, the dulling bath, a symbolic act to blunt whatever desire or boldness led to the offense. Second, a period of aromatic seclusion, where Hrafn must remain in the shrine for a full day, letting the stink sink in, with no company but the officiant and the birds. And third, a reintroduction ritual, in which he'll wear a wreath of damp moss and offer guests warm water and clean cloths as they pass. No one is meant to mock him, but no one is meant to forget either. Some Icelandic sagas make passing mention of sweat huts of shame or fumes for the reckless. Scholars disagree on whether these rituals were widely practiced or regional innovations passed down through oral law. What is known is that water, steam, and scent played a key role in Icelandic cultural punishment, especially for offenses that blurred the boundary between public and private. Body and house, there's a strangely intimate quality to this scene. Hrafn doesn't look broken, just wet, slightly humiliated, and deeply reflective. The officiant now brushes his back with a frond dipped in vinegar. Every motion is careful, formal, even reverent. This isn't torture, it's theater, flavored with meaning. And just outside the shrine, a curious crowd lingers. No jeering, just eyes. One woman holds her scarf tighter. A boy whispers to his sister. A man folds his arms and mutters something about the old ways being best for matters of flesh and folly. There's a larger story here. Of course, how a land with such brutal weather produced a culture so attuned to nuance and ceremony in a harsher society. Hrafn might have lost an eye, a hand, or worse. But here, he's bathed, watched, temporarily scented like a bog-cursed sheep. It's somehow worse. And yet better, even the guest he offended is here, standing at a respectful distance. Her gaze is neutral. She doesn't speak, but she watches. The final rinse-clear water from a glacial jug poured over his head. A second woman dries his shoulders with linen, and the ceremony ends not with an apology, but with a whispered phrase from the officiant, "Let steam cleanse what fire did not touch." You leave the scene quietly, the wind cool against your cheeks, the scent of angelica roots still clinging to your cloak. You imagine returning to this ritual in thought, months from now, remembering the way shame can be softened not with pain but with ritual, humility, and the sting of ash sap in cold air died in Iceland. Some punishments were felt not in bruises, but in how long it took the wind to carry the smell of regret away. Evening creeps in slow at Hingvellir, like honey poured over stone. The shadows have grown long and angled, and the smell of smoked trout and drying kelp rides the wind in lazy whirls. You follow a small procession now, no horses, no guards. Just 3 elders, a folded rug, and a girl walking barefoot over grass slick with dew. Her name is Brynhild. She's no criminal, not exactly, but she's done something the Sagas treat with a peculiar blend of reverence and irritation. She has refused a marriage arrangement, and in doing so, disturbed the delicate weave of local alliances. Today's punishment, a gentle, rarely invoked ordeal known as the sitting of the silent mat. It's not well known outside Icelandic oral law, but in small valleys, it carried weight. When a young woman publicly rejected a betrothal, especially one agreed to by her male kin, she could be called to sit in silence on a designated mat, usually woven from old wool and lined with runes, while community members walked slowly past. Her and it did nothing, no questions, no judgment, just presence. The mat is placed beneath a birch tree beside the path leading to the law field. She sits cross-legged, her back straight, hands resting atop her knees. Her hair is unbound, a symbol of unfinished business. Her shawl is dyed with faded madder root, the color of dusk and defiance dot at first glance. It seems too mild to be punishment, but the silence is its own storm. People pass. No one speaks. Not even her cousins. A child reaches out to hand her a berry. The mother gently pulls the child away. This punishment is not about guilt. It's about social friction, the kind that arises when expectations crack, when the old codes of honor and arrangement bump against individual desire. Brynhild's family had hoped to bind themselves to a neighboring farmstead. A good match. Respectable. The boy was not cruel, but she said no. And not just in private. She said no in public. Now, she sits alone. You learn that the duration of the mat sitting varies. Some last an hour, others all day, rarely longer. The idea is not to break the person but to offer them a mirror and to give the community a space to feel and express their quiet disapproval without words. Some say it began as a feminine form of atonement. Others argue it's closer to a rite of social rebalancing, a pause before roles are redrawn. Either way, it's ancient. An old tale tells of a woman named Cora who sat 3 days on a frost-soaked mat after declaring she would not marry unless the fjord itself froze over. The fjord did not freeze. She married a priest as son, but every guest whispered that she had won the argument. Back here, Brynhild shifts slightly. The mat creaks beneath her. One of the elders watching nearby nods approvingly, or simply noting the motion. The crowd moves slowly. A few teenagers giggle and are hushed. A boy carries a carved bowl of hot milk and sets it gently beside her. Without comment. The milk offering is a signal. It means the punishment is nearing its end. You think about how strange and subtle this punishment is. There's no force, no scarring, just a pause in the rhythm of things, like the breath held before the next verse in a song. And when the milk is touched, if she chooses to drink, it is taken as her reentry, not a surrender, a gesture of readiness. You Remember how Iceland's laws often wrap personal agency inside communal ceremony. You could disobey, yes, but the ripples it caused were acknowledged, ritualized, softened by performance. Punishment and storytelling were never far apart. Hush falls. Brynhild reaches for the bowl. She lifts it, not in haste, but deliberately. Takes a sip, replaces it beside her. A boy nearby exhales audibly. One elder smiles faintly. Another nods to the third, and just like that, the silence dissolves. Her mother appears a moment later and gently places a shawl over her shoulders. This one dyed a warm ochre, the color of endings and harvest. She stands, no applause. But the next person to pass her, an older woman from another valley, touches Brynhild's arm gently and says, "The path is still yours, if you choose it." And maybe that's what this punishment truly is. Not a cage, but a corridor, narrow, maybe chilly, but passable. As the procession fades into the hum of evening, you look back at the woven mat, now empty, a little frayed at the edges. Someone will fold it and store it away until next season. Perhaps it will never be used again. Or perhaps a girl 3 winters from now will sit in the same place, hands on her knees, waiting for the world to decide what to do with her boldness. In Iceland, even disobedience has a seat woven just for it, where silence can speak the loudest. The moon has risen now, silvering the tops of every tent and grazing the glint of iron tools laid out to cool. Hingvellir has quieted. Only a few fires flicker, and distant voices murmur like streams over stone. But you're not headed to sleep just yet. Word spreads that another punishment is underway, an odd one, older than even most law speakers care to remember. Something about wool and teeth and old debts unpaid. You find them in a hollow lit by torchlight. 2 men seated cross-legged, facing each other. Between them a single sheep's fleece dyed jet black. This is the trial of the spindle's bite, a punishment seldom invoked, reserved for those whose crimes revolve around deceit by omission, not lies told outright, but truths withheld when they mattered most. One of the men is younger, red-bearded, stiff-backed, and visibly annoyed. The other, older, lean and hollow-eyed, stares down at the fleece with the grim patience of someone who knows he's lost. Before the game begins, you learn the older man, Sturla, had failed to disclose that his brother died in bedtime. More importantly, that Sturla had taken the man's meager tools and livestock before the creditors could reach them. No one would have cared much, except that one of those creditors was a widow raising 2 children, owed to sacks of flour and a yoke she needed to plant her barley. By hiding the death for a few days, Sturla denied her the claim. No one calls it theft, not openly, but the truth was buried long enough to feel like a betrayal. So now, he must face this trial of symbolism. Here's how it works. The fleece, symbol of livelihood, is placed between the accused and an appointed watcher, usually someone neutral, like a distant cousin or sworn neighbor. Both men must spin a strand of thread from it, using a crude drop spindle made from driftwood and antler. They spin in silence. The process is slow, deliberate, almost meditative. Each time Sturla's spindle wobbles, the watcher leans forward and bites the thread, snapping it clean with his teeth, not as punishment, but as a reminder, your truth was broken, and so your thread shall be too. If the spindle is dropped 3 times, or the thread is bitten 3 times, the ritual ends, and the watcher will cut a notch into a wooden tablet that will be posted outside Sturla's home. For one season, a soft warning, carved in ash wood, that this man once hid what he should have spoken. Some say it began as a shepherd's ritual used when someone hoarded wool during lean winters or passed off spoiled fleece as fresh. Others trace it to older rituals of narrative weaving, where thread represented truth and the breaking of it signified a breach in the fabric of trust. You sit near a girl plucking a dry grass. She leans over and whispers. If his third thread breaks, he has to wear a sheep's tail around his belt for a week. They'll call him Wolmuth. You stifle a smile. Icelandic punishment often walks that strange line between solemn and absurd. The stakes are real, but the delivery, almost theatrical. Sturla's first spin breaks after a few minutes. The watcher's teeth flash in the firelight, and the thread snaps with a clean little ping. Sturla exhales, lips tight. The second holds. Longer, nearly perfect. In fact, until the spindle slips ever so slightly and kisses the fleece. That counts. The watcher leans in again. Snap. To dot by the third. The tension is palpable. People have stopped pretending not to watch. The widow stands nearby, silent, not triumphant, just present. And then, slowly, impossibly, the third strand holds, thin, yes, fragile, but unbroken. When the watcher reaches for it, he pauses and, instead of snapping it, ties it into a loop, which he places in Sturla's palm. A gesture not of victory, but of earned imperfection. The assembled watchers nod. Sturla will still bear the mark, the tablet, the mutterings, the awkward greetings at winter feasts. But he won't wear the sheep's tail. Not this time. You wonder about the nature of punishment in Iceland again, how it seems more focused on containment than cruelty. A recognition that wrongdoing is part of human nature, but that it can be guided, corrected, even softened through ritual. The Sagas don't speak often of this trial, but there's one peculiar verse in Vatnsdæla's saga that scholars often debate. He spun in silence, though the wool burned, and though his breath steamed with shame. But when the thread held, so did his name stitched back into the hall's bright tapestry. Some believe it refers to a punishment like this, others say it's simply poetic. But tonight, under torchlight, you feel its truth. As the crowd thins, and the fleece is gathered, Sturla stands slowly, clutching the looped thread. He walks past the widow, nodding. She returns it. No one claps, no one cheers. The ritual has done what it was meant to do. Not to destroy, not even to judge, but to spin the broken truth into something that can be carried. And in a land where memory is colder than the wind, that's more than most men get. Night deepens like ink spilled slowly across the sky. The stars over Hingvellir begin to blink awake, scattered above the mossy plains like ancient runes no one can quite read. You walk the perimeter of the settlement now, where fewer fires glow and fewer voices carry. It's here, on the edge of things, that you hear the steady rhythm of footsteps on gravel, deliberate, heavy, counted. The man walking is Eiríkur the Broad. You've heard the name whispered before, not in reverence or hatred, but with the uncomfortable breath people reserve for those who've crossed invisible lines. His punishment is one of the rarest, and most ancient still practiced. They call it the circle walk. It is not violent, it does not scar, but it is brutal in its own way, a test of endurance, humility, and public patience. Eiríkur walks in slow, concentric loops around the settlement for 7 nights, always barefoot, always silent. Each full circle he completes must be witnessed by someone awake, a kind of living ledger of his endurance, his crime. He failed to uphold ritual, mourning duties for his wife's sister, a woman who had lived under his roof for 3 years before her sudden death from illness. No mourning cloth was hung, no ale brewed in her name, no stone laid in her memory. The body was buried, yes, but without a keening, without the women's songs, and perhaps most egregiously without the fire ritual that signaled her safe passage to the next world. To some, it may sound like a mistake, an omission, but here, in this land of saga and smoke, ritual is not optional. It is the thread that binds the living to the dead. Eiríkur's silence was seen as a deep insult to the community's trust, especially to the women who had helped tend the body, expecting a proper farewell. So now he walks, every night, around and around. Each time, he passes the fire ring near the Law Hill. A youth clangs a small bell carved from whale bone, not to shame him, but to mark the rhythm. At dawn, he must stop wherever he stands and sit quietly until the sun rises fully. Then, and only then, may he return to his tent. Some historians believe this punishment was reserved for men who refused emotional rites, grieving praying, keening because such refusal was seen as a dangerous imbalance of the masculine and feminine obligations of Icelandic communal life. To grieve was not weakness, to grieve was honor. Others argue it was tied to fears of haunting if the dead were not properly mourned. They could not rest, and might return as draugr, restless spirits, bone-damp and angry. The walk, then, is a form of cleansing by repetition, each step a spoken regret, each loop a circle of memory redrawn. Eirik's feet are wrapped in strips of cloth, more for symbolism than comfort. By the third day, they say, he'll bleed through them. But by the seventh, if he endures, he'll be allowed to participate in the final rite, the lighting of the ash lantern, a flame carried from his hearth to a cairn built at the woman's grave. There, he'll speak 3 words, no more, no less, and scatter pine needles into the fire. You ask someone what those 3 words usually are. They shrug. Depends, they whisper. Some say I remember you. Others say sleep in peace. One man said I was wrong. The fire takes them all the same. You watch Eirik around a corner, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed forward. No one jeers. This isn't that kind of punishment. There's no audience here, just watchers. People take shifts sitting on flat stones, eyes heavy with sleep, noting each pass. A woman brings him warm water. He drinks, nods once, continues. A child watches him, curious, clutching a rag doll made of braided sheep's hair. The Sagas say little of the circle walk, but there's a haunting stanza, Angel's Saga, that scholars often tie to it. 7 nights and 7 loops. He walked the world he did not build, and by the fire's 7th flicker, the name he'd forgotten remembered him. You sit near the bell, feeling the ground vibrate softly as Eirik passes. There's something ancient about this rhythm, older than law, older than chieftains. It feels like a heartbeat drawn in footsteps. And perhaps that's the truth of this punishment. It is not about penance. It is about making space for grief, where none was given in Iceland. Even the forgotten dead are owed their footsteps. The frost is setting and now delicate on grass tips, crisp on cloak hems. That unmistakable shimmer of Iceland's twilight cold. You wander close to the shallows of the lake, where steam rises like ghosts from hidden hot springs. There's quiet music in the wind, low, drawn-out notes from a reed whistle someone plays to the east. But what draws you is something stranger still, the scent of wet clay and the sound of recitation. Tonight's punishment is not one of walking or silence, not even of scent or thread. It's a punishment by verse, a rare custom known among the Sagas' poets dead. You've heard of it only in fragments. A punishment where the condemned must compose a public drapa, a poem in praise of the very person they wronged. The condemned tonight is a woman courteous, a known traitor, and sharp-tongued negotiator. She once boasted of underweighing a rival's silver, sewing fish packed with stones, even disguising moldy cheese with a layer of smoked ash. Clever, perhaps, but recently, she was caught using love charms to sway a younger merchant into signing an unfair trade contract. Rumors say she used rose oil on the documents and tucked a carved bone token into the boy's belt. While dancing near the coals, it worked briefly. Then came discovery, confrontation, embarrassment, and now, punishment. But not banishment, not a fight, no. In Hingvellir, when deception wore the clothes of charm and romance, the response was lyrical. Co-Rhoda stands on a raised platform made of driftwood and whale ribs. Before her sits the merchant she wronged, young and plainly uncomfortable, flanked by his mother and a cousin with crossed arms. She clears her throat. In one hand, a thin slate etched with staves. In the other, nothing but air. She begins her poem. It is soft, careful, descriptive. She praises his honesty, his hand strong enough to haul nets but gentle enough to sign fair weight. She calls his eyes clearer than any silver scale. She apologizes veiled but sincere by saying, I once salted the truth too richly, hoping to preserve what should have simply been shared. It's clever and strangely touching. The crowd listens in stillness. There's laughter gentle, approving as she leans into a line comparing his voice to a spring thawing through packed snow. There's even a moment of breath-held silence. When she names the love charm itself, I carved you a rune not for love, but for gain, and learn too late that neither responds well to lies. This is her atonement. To speak well, from the heart, without irony, for the one she tried to manipulate died in Iceland. The spoken word held binding forsos were taken aloud, promises sung into bone, insults carved into sagas. To speak publicly in this way was not merely performance. It was an unweaving and reweaving of social fabric, according to saga fragments. Poet's debt was reserved for those whose crimes twisted words, false praise, sweetened bribes, lies in courtship, or cleverly veiled betrayals in negotiation. The punishment was not humiliation, but restorative voice. The condemned had to use the same gift words that caused the offense to mend the damage. Some say a poorly delivered poem could lead to further penalty as second composition, or a season of service in the offended's household. But a strong poem, well received, that could wash away shame faster than water. Chorus ends her verse with a final line that floats on the cold air like breath. If trade is balance, then let this rhyme weigh more than the charm I tried. She bows, not deeply, just enough that there is no applause, only silence. Then the young merchant stands, walks to the platform, and offers her a single object, a salted fish wrapped in linen. A strange gesture, until you realize he accepts the poem. This ritual is not about forgiveness, it's about recognition. He does not say he trusts her now, but he accepts the art of her apology, and by extension, the return of her voice to the community. You watch her descend from the platform and vanish into the murmuring crowd. The gossip that follows is quiet, admiring, tinged with old superstition. Some still claim her verse was too good to practice the second charm, perhaps. But most agree she faced her own trickery, line by line. The saga writers would adore this moment, and perhaps, in another 100 years, someone will recite her poem not as punishment, but as art. In Iceland, even those who twist words must one. They set them straight, in public, in rhyme, and always with care. The fire pits burn lower now, coal red and slumped with sleep. Most of Hingvellir rests. Even the wind seems softer, lapping lazily at the turf walls and canvas flaps. But beyond the edge of the main encampment where the rocks get craggy and the land begins to slope toward shadow, one final punishment glows under the moon. A small group gathers near a narrow ravine, lit only by a fat wick torch and the dim gleam of lanterns reflected on wet stone. Tonight's sentence is one of the strangest, and most symbolically charged in the Icelandic legal memory. They call it the echo confession. And it's not spoken to people, it is spoken to stone. The condemned is a young man named Vali, slight and pale, his face drawn tight as a fishing line stretched afar. His crime, slander in the dark. He was caught whispering a string of crude accusations against a woman. He once courted accusations about her private conduct, her supposed lovers, her nightly visitors, but never in public, always near thresholds, in alleys, beneath cloaks. Someone finally overheard him. A cousin, perhaps, maybe even a rival suitor. The woman brought her complaint to the elders, and since none of his words were spoken loud enough for the community to judge, his punishment must match the shape of the offense. Words returned to him emptily, endlessly. Hence, the ravine. It's an old volcanic split in the land, smooth-faced rock, shallow but resonant, the kind of place where sound doubles back, changed and distant. The perfect place to send a voice when no one wants to hear it, but it still must be said. Vali stands on the edge of the crack, shoulders hunched, arms stiff at his sides. Before him, a rune-carved staff has been planted, marking the official start of his echoing. His sentence is this: to recite aloud every rumor he spread, phrase exactly as he whispered them, followed each time by a formal correction. The correction must be poetic, balanced, and never sarcastic. You inch closer. Stones crunching beneath your feet. The first line reaches you, his voice cracking slightly. I said her smile was too wide, her hunger too eager. A pause. Then, softer. But she only smiled kindly, and I mistook the warmth for invitation. It echoes, bounces, comes back thinner. The rock repeats it like a priest reading the confession back in a dream. The ritual continues. Volley names the moments he lied, the fire circle, where he suggested she walked in shadows, the trade stall where he hinted at her shame, the drinking hall where his silence meant consent to a slanderous joke. Each time, he follows with a correction, not flowery, but carefully phrased. One is a metaphor about rivers. One uses the image of we'll wash clean after a sheep's fall. Another is just a simple phrase. She never owed me kindness, and yet she offered it. The woman is not here. That's part of the punishment too. He may not apologize to her directly. His apology must be eaten by the rocks. A woman nearby, perhaps one of the officiants, explains that this ritual is not for forgiveness, but for unweaving the public fabric of gossip. In Iceland, where oral storytelling shaped law and memory, to slander was to etch a false verse into the saga of a person's life. This ceremony rewrites it but never deletes it. Historians debate what her echo confession was common or just regional, perhaps practiced only by a few law families in the South. But all agree it was emotionally potent, especially for crimes involving intimacy, gender, or manipulation without proof. It allowed the punished to keep their limbs, their name, even their role in the community, but required them to stand against the very air and own what they tried to bury. Volley falters once, his voice shakes when he repeats a phrase too vulgar for even these quiet rocks. But the officiant taps the staff twice, gently, and he continues. Some in the crowd look away. Some nod, barely. One man murmurs, better echoed than rotted. When Volley reaches the final line, he recites it 3 times, each softer than the last. I spoke what I did not know. I told the dark what I feared. But truth is not mine to shape. Then silence, not applause, not even rustling. Just the rocks replying, one last ghost of his voice curling back toward his face. He steps back. The staff is removed. Someone offers him a warm cloth. Another, a skin of water. No one speaks to him yet. That will come later. Perhaps in days. Perhaps not at all. You realize something Icelandic in this moment. Here, even gossip must be answered in full voice. And even that voice must be made humble enough to listen to its own echo. You turn to leave, boots damp with dew, the whisper of confession still riding low behind you like a second breath. In Iceland, lies are not only sins of the mouth, but also of silence, and must be answered by the stones that hear everything. By now, even the embers sleep. The sky's dark velvet is speckled with stars so clear you'd swear they were embroidered thereby. And only the crunch of your own footsteps keeps you company as you move deeper toward the fringe of the Hangveller, camp beyond the feasting grounds, past the ring of tents, and into the area that's rarely spoken of directly, the boundary field. This is where Iceland places the punished who cannot be punished cleanly. Not exiled, not whipped, not shamed aloud. These are the ones who've tangled themselves into moral knots too complicated for Saga or Unwind. And tonight, one of them is being asked to submit to a strange, old practice called half reputation. The man's name is Halfdan, and he has done something difficult to explain, not violent, not quite deceitful, but deeply unsettling to the social order. He has been double betrothing, whispering soft promises of union and affection to different women, from to different valleys, both of them kin to minor law speakers, and neither of them aware of the other. He used words like always and soon and when my land is cleared for us, and for a time. He was believed. The truth unraveled slowly first when a cloak clasp meant for one was seen on the shoulder of the other, then when messages overlapped, too similar to be coincidence. The accusations followed, and Halfton confessed not just to the actions, but to the softness of his speech. The way he couldn't quite say no when affection was given. He didn't mean to deceive, he claimed. He simply followed warmth wherever it offered itself. For that, he receives half reputation. A strange term, not quite legal, not quite folkloric. It means that Halfton will live, eat, speak, trade, but only partially. For a full lunar cycle, he must not be referred to by name. No one may greet him first. No one may mention him unless absolutely necessary, and even then, only by a placeholder title. The between one, the punishment is profoundly psychological, not shunning. He's not invisible. He's simply reduced present, but without definition. Tonight, the ritual begins. A circle of 11 witnesses surrounds him, 5 from each woman's valley, and 1 impartial. They carry small banners dipped in ink. Each reads a phrase once attributed to Halfton. Fragments of the false courtship. You will see me by summer's edge. There is no one I long for more. Let me build the door before I ask you to step through it. Each banner is held above a low flame until the ink softens and fades, not burned, not destroyed, just erased by warmth. The phrases vanish, leaving the cloth blank. Then, one by one, the banners are wrapped around small stones and cast into a shallow stream. There is no accusation here. No one calls him names. In fact, it is almost gentle. The 2 women watch from a distance, wrapped in furs, silent and expressionless. Their presence is ceremonial, a recognition of injury without the need to perform outrage. Halfton stands alone, hands clasped, a small wooden token hanging from his belt with a single notch carved into it. The token, his only identifier, will hang by his door at home. If travelers pass, they will know the man inside is only half himself. He may not make deals unless spoken to. He may not sing aloud. He may not sleep in the same tent twice in a row. These restrictions are symbolic, designed to reflect his lack of constancy. The way he drifted between affections as though promises were weather. The Sagas mention men, made dim by their own shadows. A poetic phrase believed to refer to those who lived under half reputation. One saga tells of a man who bore the punishment so well, so humbly, that he was later granted a feast in his honor, a kind of renaming ceremony. But others fared worse, fading quietly into footnotes, remembered only by the placeholder titles. They wore, some scholars wonder, whether half reputation was more of a moral invention than a legal one, to wielded mostly by women to reclaim narrative control and a system that otherwise gave them few avenues for retaliation. And perhaps that's what makes it so poignant. Because here, punishment doesn't draw blood. It softens a name until it can no longer be held, then waits to see if the person inside still wants it back. The wind rises slightly as the last cloth floats downstream. Halfton turns, slowly, and walks the path back toward camp. No one stops him, but no one joins him either. He walks alone, a man-shaped outline, until he proves otherwise. You stand a while longer, watching the empty stream, hearing only the water and the whisper of fading ink. In Iceland, when love is misused, your name may not be taken, but it may be quietly set aside. By this hour, the world has shrunk to soft shadows and slow breaths. Hingvellir lies under a hush so deep that even the livestock seem to sleep lighter. The only movement now comes from the tall silhouette of the lava cliffs, where a single torch glows like a watchful eye. You follow its flicker, drawn toward another strange sentence unfolding in the dark. Tonight, the punished walks not on earth but on words. Her name is Odni, a woman known for her sharp wit and sharper tongue. Unlike the previous offenders, her crime is neither deceit nor betrayal. It is disruption by poetry. Odni is a skald, a poet, one of the rare women who mastered the delicate, dangerous art of nigh. These were insult poems, barbed verses meant to shame, undermine, or provoke. They could be devastating when sung in the right tone to the right ears. And Odney was talented, perhaps 3 seasons ago. She composed a verse mocking a local priest's indecision and a marriage dispute. The lines were clever, even beautiful, so much so that they spread. They traveled further than intended, crossing the fjord and into the priest's home valley, where his kin demanded satisfaction. But there was no legal proof of harm. The poem was public, yes, but Odney had spoken no lies. She merely shaped the truth with rhythm and sting. And so the assembly turned to a lesser-known punishment, the paper path. Here's how it works. The poet must walk a winding route through Hingvellir, guided not by torches or signs, but by her own verses transcribed, mounted, and laid out in sequence on dyed parchment, placed along the ground like stepping stones. Each verse must be walked over, but before stepping, she must speak it aloud, with no performance. No flourish, just the plain weight of the words as they are. If the verse was harsh, it must be spoken with calm. If mocking, then now, as something neutral. Distant, faded, Odney begins at the edge of the lava cliffs. The first verse is penned to a flat stone, by a silver hairpin, one of her own, judging by the carved initials. She reads, "He who claims to rule the hearth cannot hold his tongue nor staff. His bride waits long, and longer still, for spine to match his crafted will." A brutal verse, and in its time, a popular one. She reads it softly, without effect, then steps forward, bare feet pressing the parchment into stone. This is not humiliation. No crowd jeers, no rotten fish are flung. This is ritual reclamation, a poet taking responsibility not for what was false, but for what was to true, to cutting, to uncontained. The next parchment waits just ahead, curled slightly in the dew. Another verse, another step. The ritual continues, some 20 stanzas in all, spaced unevenly, winding through the settlement like a broken path. Each must be read aloud. Each must be walked upon. You hear whispers from those watching. It's said if the wind carries your words back to your own ears during the paper path, you'll never speak ill again. Another person replies, or you'll write even better, but only in whispers. Some believe this tradition originated with the outlaw poets, those banished for satirical songs too hot for the courts to hold. Before leaving, they'd walk their own words like ashes trailing behind. Then the others say it was a punishment designed by law speakers tired of public embarrassment, eager to make poets feel what it meant to turn language into knives. Odney reaches a cluster of the final verses. Her voice is low but steady. The poems are still brilliant, but now they hang in the air like old iron tools, once sharp, now dulled by time and repetition. And then, at the final page, she stops. The parchment is blank. This is the final part of the ritual. She must kneel, retrieve a sliver of charcoal from the basket left there, and write a single verse, not in defense, not in apology, but in reflection, a coda to the trail. She writes slowly. You can't see the words yet, but as she lays down the charcoal, she speaks softly, more to herself than to the world. If rhyme can build and rhyme can burn, then let this fire learn to warm. She places the parchment gently on the stone, weights it with a pebble, and steps off the path. The ritual is complete. In the weeks ahead, she will be permitted to compose again, but with restriction. Her verses must be reviewed by a senior skald, a sort of poetic elder. She'll wear a copper brooch with a rune for balance etched in its back. Quiet signs, quiet lessons. You stand in silence as the torch is doused. The parchment path remains, fluttering faintly in the breeze. Poems both revered and retired. And perhaps that is the strange truth here. In Iceland, even words must be walked, especially when they wander too far. The stars above Hingvellir now seem almost too quiet, to knowing. They've watched centuries of stories unfold in this valley, tales carved into lava and breath of light. But not all punishments here unfold in firelight or with spoken confession. Some slip into the folds of daily life, subtle, creeping, and tonight, you are led toward one of the strangest and most domestic punishments of all. The cold hearth ritual. At first glance, Nothing seems unusual. A turf house sits on a low rise near the eastern stream, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. The windows glow faintly from within. You might mistake it for just another farmstead built for sheltering guests during the assembly. But there is no smell of cooking, no steam of stewed lamb or boiling fish, no laughter, no music. Only the clatter of tools and the low thump of wood being split in short, methodical bursts. This is where a woman named Rana lives, and for the next 13 nights. She must maintain a home that may not feed. Her offense, hoarding hospitality. Quiet betrayal in a land where generosity is sacred. She had extra fish, extra flour, extra beds. But when travelers came cold, wet, unarmed, she turned them away with smiles and excuses. Not once, not twice, but 5 times. Each time, she claimed her roof was full, her oven broken, her stores spoiled. Yet her neighbors saw the truth. Clean linens hung outside. The oven smoked. Her pantry door creaked open and shut at odd hours. One even claimed to hear laughter behind the turf walls, though the windows remained dark. In Icelandic law, this wasn't thievery, but it wasn't nothing, refusing hospitality especially during travel season was viewed as a kind of spiritual coldness, a fraying of the covenant between host and wanderer. So, the assembly ordered the cold hearth punishment. Here's how it works. For 13 nights, Rana must tend her house exactly as she would if she were preparing for a feast. Clean, cook, arrange, wash, lay out table settings, but no one manner. She is forbidden from serving a guest or even letting someone step across the threshold after dusk. And most importantly, no fire may burn in her hearth past sundown. She must light it before nightfall, cook early, then let it go cold. The symbolism is heavy. A home that looks warm but gives no heat. A dwelling full of gesture, but empty of welcome. You peer through the window and see her laying out a bowl of berries beside a folded cloth. Her hands move with practiced grace, but her face is blank, neither ashamed nor stubborn, just suspended. She knows this is a sentence each morning. The neighbors are permitted to inspect the interior. If the dishes aren't washed, or the floor swept, or the hearth wiped of ash, she must start again. If she's caught warming a second pot after sundown, her term extends by 3 days. Some call this punishment a form of ethical embroidery, and pick the social thread you loosen. Day by day, stitch by stitch. There's a verse from Sturlunga's Saga that some scholars tie to this practice. Though it's disputed, the pot that never boiled for strangers will hiss, only for the silence that follows. Others claim the custom began among the poorest homesteads, where even a single withheld meal could mean death to a traveler in winter. Whether myth or history, the message is clear. Hospitality is sacred, and once broken, it must be mended with exacting patience. Rana opens a window to let the last heat out. She does not speak. A child nearby throws a twig at her wall, not in cruelty, but almost in sympathy. Another woman murmurs she used to sing while she baked, hasn't sung all week. And that's the true weight of this ritual, not isolation, not mockery, but presence without communion. She must live fully in the house she once closed to tightly live in it until it cools. And only then will she be allowed to feed others again. After 13 nights, if she completes the term, she'll be given a ceremonial loaf of dark barley, bread by the same neighbor she once refused. She'll slice it in front of them and pass it around. No speech, no apology, just the act, done fully. And that act will be the rewarming. You linger a little longer near the turf wall. A chicken wanders by, pecking at nothing. The wind smells faintly of ash and thyme. Inside, Rana folds a third cloth, then begins wiping her table for the second time. And maybe that's the soft truth of Icelandic justice, not to burn the house down, but to ask it to remember what warmth is for. The edge of night is thinning now, just barely. A faint silver hum lines the tops of the distant hills, where dawn will eventually brush the sky with color again. But until then, Hingvellir remains hushed, caught in the liminal stillness where the world feels like a held breath. And as you follow a winding sheep trail toward the southern rise, you come upon one of the most ancient, most symbolic punishments still whispered about in the sagas. They call it the spade's farewell. It's quiet here, a low, flat hill bare, except for a ring of stones and a freshly dug trench that's not quite a grave, and not quite a garden. This punishment isn't common. In fact, most Icelanders can only name 1 or 2 stories where it was used. But when it is, it always carries weight, the kind of offense that wounds the land itself. The man standing in the ring is old, white-haired, slow-moving, with thick fingers stained by peat. His name is Geir, and he's lived many winters as a respected landholder, a keeper of sheep and turf and frost-hardened barley. But over the last few seasons, he became known for something else, refusing landright passage to the dying twice. A woman's cart was turned away on its way to a healer. Once, he refused a passage path for a man being carried to burial, always with the same excuse: the track is mine. His boundaries mattered more than breath. And now, the land remembers. So tonight, Geir performs the spade's farewell. It's hard. This ritual is about reclaiming the relationship between person and earth, a poetic apology to the land for wielding it like a wall. Geir will spend this night and the next to digging a symbolic trench, wide enough for a man to lie in, deep enough for the roots to breathe, but never deep enough to bury. He works barefoot, shirtless, with a wooden spade marked with runes of humility. Each stroke of the blade into the earth is accompanied by a spoken phrase, not a confession, but a reminder of what land was meant for. Things like, this track once carried a bride. This corner watched a storm pass through. This soil held the laughter of goats. He speaks these aloud, one after another, as he digs. It's not the physical labor that matters, it's the rhythm, the naming, the act of voicing memory into the ground. There's an elder here, seated on a low stool, keeping tally. She counts both words and strokes, making sure the land is honored with both breath and sweat. You ask a nearby woman what happens at the end of the 3 nights. She tells you, he must sleep in the trench, 1 night only, just once, clothed and covered in a light netting of moss and straw, like a softened grave. It's not burial, it's rest. A symbolic return to the land he once denied. At dawn, someone will pull him gently from the trench, not family, not friend, but a child under the age of 10. A reminder that land is never truly owned, only borrowed, especially by those who'll be gone sooner than they think. Scholars argue about the ritual's roots. Some claim it's derived from early settler superstitions that refusing land to a traveler would invite crop failure or miscarriage. Others believe it's older still, part of a lost priestly rite where land had to be reopened through sweat and word before the seasons could continue. In Egil's saga, there's a peculiar passage often cited: the man who broke the ground for kin was the man whose roots grew deepest, and the one who fenced it tightly was buried in walls he built for himself. Geir digs slowly. He is quiet now, whispering more than speaking. His spade hits a stone. He pauses, lifts it out carefully, and sets it beside the trench. Even that seems meaningful, as if he's lifting an old grudge from the path nearby. Someone has placed a wooden bowl filled with dark bread and water. No feast, just sustenance for a man atoning with his muscles, not his mouth. You notice now that no one stands close to him. There's a quiet respect here, not distance out of contempt, but out of reverence. Geir isn't being shamed. He's being witnessed. And there's a difference. Later, after he lies in the trench, the child who wakes him will offer him a folded piece of parchment with only 1 word written on it: open. What he does with that is his own business. Some keep it, some bury it again. But until then, he keeps digging, the rhythm soft, deliberate, the earth turning under the stars. And you wonder, in a place where punishment so often wears the cloak of poetry, maybe the greatest mercy isn't fire or exile, but the invitation to remember what soil is for. The art now is suspended no longer night, not quite dawn, the thin, blue-gray Icelandic twilight that stretches forever in the summer months. When darkness never fully wins, Hingvellir lies muffled, its ridges and hollows draped in a kind of silken quiet, and into that softness you tread uphill toward the Law Rock, where the air itself seems to wait. Tonight's punishment is not one of isolation or toil. It's one of voice without answer, a ceremony reserved for those who sought to dominate debate, drown others out, or twist law into theater. The punishment is called speech without witness, and the man standing on the stone platform is called Alital, silver-bearded, cloaked in the blue of self-importance. He's well known, or was, for his endless interruptions during Alwyn gatherings. His booming voice often overrode lesser men's arguments. He scoffed, laughed loudly, clapped derisively during judgments, and once was seen theatrically covering his ears while a rival tried to read a land charter aloud. It wasn't just rudeness, it was erosion. He turned law into mockery. So now, he's been sentenced to speak. Here's how it works. He must deliver a formal oration at the Law Rock, the most sacred speaking place in Iceland. The voice carried from here echoes across the valley for generations. Laws were recited from this very stone, memorized, proclaimed, recorded not in ink, but in muscle and mouth. Ali must give a speech about the value of listening, a full quarter hour, compose himself, approved by two legal scribes. It must include citations of rulings he once interrupted, names of people he shouted over, and reflections, poetic ones, on silence as a civic good. And the catch? No one is allowed to stay and hear it. When he begins, the law hill is cleared. Not a single soul may remain. Not one breath may respond. Ali speaks now to empty stone, empty sky, and the soft echo of his own voice sliding down the mossy slopes. It's eerie to hear such passion bounce around with no anchor. A powerful voice made ghostly by absence. You and the others watch from far away, tucked behind tents or trees, just out of earshot. That's part of the design. He can't be utterly alone, or the lesson loses meaning. But no one may acknowledge the content of his speech. Not later, not in conversation, not even in jest. This ritual has roots in Saga-era concepts of weightless words, a speech that carried form but no force. A punishment for those who wielded words like spears but refused the burden of listening. In Ljovetninga saga, there's an obscure verse scholars linked to this ritual. He stood on stone, and stone replied, not with words, but with the weight of all he never heard. There's something tragic about it, really, to see a man known for being loud, now required to speak into a hollow that will never echo back meaningfully. His voice cracks once, whether from emotion or when, it's hard to say. He's not performing now. There's no one to impress, only basalt and clouds. When the speech ends, he descends the steps alone. A bell chimes once to mark the completion. A scribe nearby records the time. And that's it. No announcement, no verdict. For the next 2 weeks, Ali may not raise his voice above a whisper in public spaces. If he does, he must repeat the ritual. At dawn, barefoot, some say the punishment changes men, that it makes them gentle, that they begin to notice the breath between sentences, the way birds quiet before storms, or how a woman's pause before speaking often says more than her words. Others say nothing changes, that the truly loud simply learn to bide their time. But here, in Iceland, the act of listening is as binding as oaths, and those who forget that must speak their truth to the stones alone. The first hint of morning touches the edge of Hingvellir, now a soft golden haze spreading like honey. Across the frost-tipped grasses, you feel it on your face before you see it, that mild, forgiving light that belongs only to the end of a long northern night. But before the day returns fully, one final ceremony remains hidden in the rocks behind the waterfall, a place where voices rarely carry, and even the ravens hold their breath. Tonight's punishment is not for liars, nor lovers, nor hoarders of bread. It is for the thief of memory. The man seated in the cave alcove is called Kolbein, and he is known by his trade. He is a saga carver. The sagas, as you know, are not only spoken. They are sometimes etched onto horn, slate, or bone, small symbols, rhythmic swirls of runes that serve as cues for oral performance. Think of it like a poet's shorthand, dense with meaning, passed through families like recipe books with no ink. Kolbein's crime was subtle but cruel. He copied verses he did not create, claimed lineages, not his own, altered the endings of two different clan songs, rewriting grief as glory, failure as triumph. He made dead men into heroes they never were. When caught, he shrugged. I made them better, he said. But to Icelanders, where truth and story were once the same muscle, this was treachery. He bent memory into a tool, and in doing so, broke something sacred. So he was sentenced to the blank script. A small cave behind Jigzarafoss serves as the site. It is damp, dim, and flat-walled. Here, Kolbein must sit for 7 nights and carve a saga entirely of silence. The wood he's been given is clean birch, treated with milk and ash to make it smooth but stubborn. His tools are sharp, but he may not use runes, nor symbols, nor pictograms, only grooves. His punishment is to carve the shape of a story, without giving it content. Long sweeping lines for battle, tight spirals for grief, repeated stabs for dialogue. It is a phantom saga, a ghost version of a tale he will never tell. And worse still, he must carve not his own story, but that of the men he rewrote. Their names hang beside him, etched plainly in stone. Their true deeds measured, modest are spoken aloud by a legal reciter before each session. So Kolbein must hear what was, before shaping what cannot be seen. You peer into the cave. The candlelight flickers against the birch panel. His hands move slowly, dragging the blade into the wood, notching time each evening. Someone comes to inspect not for accuracy, but for effort. If his grooves seem lazy, rushed, or show signs of hesitation, the punishment is extended. If he tries to hide real symbols, even by accident, the panel is burned and replaced. Some call this punishment the burden of the erased, not to be silenced but to record nothing. Forever. Is difficult to watch. His shoulders hunch, his lips press tightly. At one point, he pauses, and you see it, not regret, not shame, but something softer. He's tracing a spiral, slowly, with the back of his fingernail. Maybe it once meant sorrow, now it means nothing. Or maybe everything. Saga scholars debate the authenticity of the blank script. Some claim it's a literary metaphor created by monks centuries later. Others argue that several surviving birch panels, long believed to be decoration, are actually the products of this very practice. One famous fragment, found in the West Fjords, bears 23 lines of deep grooves. A later scholar dubbed it the silence that spoke of men's truth. Kolbein finishes a line and leans back. His candle flutters. The final panel, when completed, will be buried beneath the Lar rock, never read, never seen again. Not hidden but protected from meaning. And that is the lesson. Because in Iceland, stories are not yours to improve. They are only yours to carry, exactly as they were given. And if you forget that, you may spend your nights carving echoes into the dark. The sun now stretches in earnest across the ridges of Heimvellir. It casts a golden wash over the moss, the cold stones, and the distant threads of smoke curling up from turf houses, coming back to life. But even in daylight, there are remnants of the night's truth, softly lingering punishments still unfolding, still whispered, still stitched into the story of this land. One last punishment remains tonight, and it is perhaps the most tender of all, strangest not for its cruelty, but for its melancholy mercy. This one is called the remembered silence. The woman at the heart of it is called Brynja. She is a widow, a mother, a healer. For years, she carried the reputation of a woman wise with herbs and soft words. But something changed. Last season, when a neighbor's daughter passed from illness. Brenda claimed to have seen it coming, not in arrogance, but in after-speech that soft, retrospective kind of knowing. I felt it, she told people. I just knew it wouldn't end well. Those who grieved were furious. Why didn't you say something? I would have listened, they said. But of course, no one can know that, not really. Brenda had no malice, but the damage was real. Her claim of silent foresight cast shadows on the morning, suggesting that tragedy had been allowed to bloom when it might have been stopped. And so, her sentence is neither exile nor silence nor shame. It is to become the listener of grief for one full lunar cycle, each evening from dusk until dawn. She must sit alone beside the stone of memory, a weathered boulder in the hollow, behind the assembly field. There, any who wish may come and speak their unspoken grief to her. She may not reply, not even a nod. She must receive sorrow wordlessly, as she once claimed to understand it. But there is more. Each person who speaks must end with a phrase. Let this be remembered without answer. And Brenda, upon hearing this, must take a smooth stone from the basket at her side, kiss it, and place it on the growing cairn beside her, one stone for each sorrow she hears. No one knows how many stones will pile up, perhaps only a handful, perhaps dozens. No record is kept. The stones are not marked. Each morning, she leaves. And when her month is finished, the cairn is left behind untouched, unclaimed. An anonymous monument to things felt too late. You watch from a respectful distance as a woman approaches Brenda now, shoulders hunched beneath her shawl. She speaks softly to soft for you to hear. Brenda's head tilts slightly, like a tree bending with the weight of dew. The speaker pauses, wipes her eyes, and finishes, let this be remembered without answer. Brenda lifts a stone, presses her lips to it gently, and sets it among the others. Some scholars call this ritual too poetic to be real. Others argue it emerged in times of plague or famine, when hindsight became a poison, and the urge to say I knew could divide whole communities. But there are records of it, brief mentions in farmstead letters, sagas with lines like, she who kissed the stone bore more than loss, she bore what we could not undo. You think, perhaps, this punishment isn't about Brenda at all? It's for the rest of them, the mourners, the ones who didn't get to scream or wail or scold the healer for not warning them. It is, in its own strange way, a sanctioned sorrow, structured, ritualized, softened. Brenda will carry their words, but not their judgment. She will build a cairn of echoes and then leave it behind. You step away as the sky turns from gray blue to morning peach. Birds begin their gossip. Distant voices rise. Hingviller wakes again, as it has for centuries, tangled in law, in custom, in the quiet poetry of justice made strange and slow. And perhaps, as you walk through the warming field, you understand the Icelanders just a little more. That punishment, here, isn't only retribution. It's memory made physical. It's apology, with form. It's silence used properly, not to erase, but to shape the weight of what was done. Now the sun has risen fully, stretching golden fingers across the valley and lifting the chill from the stones. Hingviller is no longer shadowed. It's bathed in the soft hum of morning low bird song, rustling grasses, the distant clink of breakfast being stirred in tin pots. The punishments have ended for now. The trench is filled in, the hearth trail lit, the echoing speeches and carved grooves left behind in silence. You walk slowly, your thoughts full, but not heavy. It's a strange peace, the kind that follows long storytelling, like waking from a dream you weren't sure was your own. The stories of Iceland's peculiar punishments are not loud ones. They are quiet, even gentle at times. They ask not for pain, but for presence, for the offender to notice what they failed to hold. A name, a guest, a silence, a truth. Each ritual was less about revenge, more about rhythm. A careful choreography of shame and softness, of responsibility turned into symbol. You think of the man walking his name into silence, The woman baking for no one, the poet forced to walk, the spine of her own verses, the landholder lying in the soil he once claimed to tightly, and the widow building a cairn of sorrow for grief she never truly caused. Their stories aren't loud, but they stay with you. And now, as the valley brightens, you feel sleep pressing again, not in exhaustion, but in the way dreams return when the world becomes too tender, too wide. You slow your steps, let your eyes grow heavy. The earth, once wrapped in punishment, now holds only forgiveness, and you, dear traveler, are part of that softness now. Close your eyes. Let the last names fade. The silence is watching over you now.